Ladies and gentlemen, the 33rd President of the United States, Harry S. Truman.
Please sit down. Well, it's good to see you here this morning for a discussion, I hope, of some historical matters in which you ought to be interested. Those of us who have passed 75 are not going to be in a position in the next 10 or 15 years to make this government run, and it's going to be up to you. Have any of you got any questions? I'll answer questions for you if you want to ask them. Did you have a question back there? Come on, young man, what is it?
Mr. President, was you ever broke?
Yes, been broke all my life. I don't think it hurts anybody. Being broke is a relative situation. A fellow has enough to support himself and his family in decent circumstances. He may not have money enough in the bank to write a check on, but he's still just the same good citizen as he would be if he had $1 million.
When
you were a little boy, were you very popular?
No. No. You know, the popular boys are those that can play games and who have good, big, tight fists, and whenever I got in a fight, I always ran. That's the reason I'm here. I never got hurt.
Mr. President, how do you like being president?
It was nice to be president of the United States, the greatest honor in the history of the world. But I wouldn't want it again. It takes about 17 hours a day, and then you get as much sleep as you can and start over again and do the next 17 hours as best you can. No man can do it as it should be done. My goodness alive, I can't answer all these questions. Now I'm going to answer one more with this young lady with the red hair right behind the school teacher there.
Mr. President, why did you drop the atom bomb?
Mr. President, the future wants to know, was it right to drop the atom bomb? After the bomb, it will be said, the future has already begun. And what future? We have brought ourselves to the time of the end. We are only hastening the end of time. And if there is no man to remember, all life was for naught, for nothing will have been.
A short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima. It is an atomic bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe. The force from which the sun draws its power has been loosed against those who brought war to the Far East.
Why was this fury cast loose on the people of Hiroshima? Was it a spectacular force for peace? Or was it a savagely cynical sanction to use the atomic bomb in future wars?
The Greeks say that Prometheus stole fire from heaven and gave it to man. And for that he was chained to a rock, and a vulture ate at his liver right straight along. But what would man have done without fire? The fire that Prometheus is supposed to have stolen from heaven was to man at that time what atomic energy is to the world today.
The energy from fission is 100 million times that of burning coal. How can this be allowed to be the culmination of man's warfare? This is not mere fire or gunpowder. This might totally destroy civilization. Why could it even have been conceived? How was it planned and built?
When I was a United States Senator and head of the War Investigating Committee, I started to look into the program of atomic energy. Henry Stimson, who was then the Secretary of War, came to see me and told me that he thought I should not do that because it was a top secret thing of the whole country. Henry Stimson was an honorable man, and I agreed with what he had to say. I didn't make any further investigation of the situation. When I became President of the United States, it was a very great surprise to me to find out what we had discovered and how we were going to use it.
Our ancestors said that imagination exceeds reality. Tomorrow, our imagination and our feelings and our responsibility will never compete with our technical ability.
Well, then the scientists convinced Albert Einstein to write a plan for President Roosevelt where he foreshadowed both atomic power for driving ships and, though much less certain, extremely powerful atom bombs.
But later, Einstein had this to say: "If I had known the Germans would not succeed in constructing the atom bomb, I would never have lifted a finger."
Einstein's letter was brought to President Roosevelt by Sachs, saying that Einstein was on the way to use atomic energy for power. He told Roosevelt that the young American inventor tried to tell Napoleon that he didn't have to cross the channel with sailing ships. He could use steamboats. And Napoleon didn't think he had any sense, just like everybody else thinks when an inventor comes along with an unusual idea. So Napoleon didn't use Fulton's idea to cross the channel, and he never got to conquer England. Well, Roosevelt finally said, "Okay, go ahead." And he gave him the munificent sum of $6,000 to start a $2.5 billion project.
And so it began. One of the scientists most responsible for the ultimate achievement was Dr. J. Robert Oppenheimer. He said later, "In some sort of crude sense, which no vulgarity, no humor, no overstatement can quite extinguish, the physicists have known sin. And this is a knowledge which they cannot lose."
It wasn't until 1941 that the scientists convinced President Roosevelt to go into the thing wholeheartedly. The thing was agreed on just the day before Pearl Harbor.
Dr. Vannevar Bush said of FDR, "No man of lesser understanding and courage could have made the decision to put so much of the nation's strength into what any man of his experience would recognize as a very long chance indeed."
On December the 2nd, 1942, in a building under the Stagg Field of the Chicago University, Fermi released the power of atomic energy. He had found that he could control that energy. Arthur Compton, one of the top scientists of the country, called it a task of nuclear physics research, whose purpose would be nothing less than to preserve the world's safety and freedom.
"But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, thou shalt not eat of it. For in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die."
It was a gigantic task. There were 15,000 people working on the thing, and 500,000 in various places, and it was so secret that they didn't know what they were doing.
The Nazi V rocket, with its TNT explosive, created an unfounded fear that Germany could also make atomic bombs. Yet many American scientists, including their British and Canadian partners, hoped it could be proven that the bomb could not be made. Then Germany and Japan could not make it either. Dr. Volney Wilson said, "I believe it can be done, and if so, it will be of great importance. But please take me off this job. It's going to be too terribly destructive. I don't want to have anything to do with it."
In 1945, soon after I left for Potsdam, the first test, of course, was to be made in New Mexico, as far away from inhabitants as possible. And as soon as that test was made, they were to inform me about it.
Nobody knew. Nobody knew whether the explosion would happen at all. Nobody knew whether the chain reaction would be so uncontrollable that it would blow up everyone watching. Nobody knew for sure that it wouldn't start a chain reaction in the hydrogen in seawater, in the unstable nitrogen in the air, one that might blow up the entire world.
Prime Minister Churchill called on me, and I told him that the bomb had been a success. And later, when Churchill and Stalin and I had a meeting, I backed Stalin into a corner after the meeting had adjourned and told him that we had the most powerful explosive in the world. He didn't know what I was talking about, but it didn't make any difference. I told him.
Use the bomb, and a city of 300,000 inhabitants will be obliterated. 100,000 human beings will die instantly and horribly, and most of the others injured. Use the bomb, and military writers like Hanson Baldwin will say, "We are the inheritors to the mantle of Genghis Khan and all of those of past history who have justified the use of utter ruthlessness in war."
We had the bomb. Now, I had to make a decision as to whether we'd use that bomb on Japan or not. And that decision was up to me, because I was the President of the United States and we controlled the bomb. On July the 16th, 1945, at 5:30 in the morning, the world began the atomic age. The first explosion that had the power of 20,000 tons of TNT. A pound of TNT, a stick of dynamite, would blow up this room. And that was an explosion that had the power of 40 million pounds of TNT in it.
We feel words inadequate to describe the effects of this bomb. The light of many suns, the tremendous ball of fire, the shock and sound, and the formation of boiling clouds were all beyond human experience. And it is the universal hope of all present that no American citizen will ever witness it on United States soil again.
This, then, was the fury that man would visit upon man. We Americans have a very noble picture of ourselves. In 1937, the United States was shocked at Franco's bombing and strafing of the helpless town of Guernica. In 1938, we also righteously protested the Japanese bombing of Nanking. Yet we did not ratify the Hague Convention of 1899, outlawing biological agents and gas. We discussed seriously whether to use gas against the Japanese. Is this our nation that would also explode the atomic bomb in the faces of hundreds of thousands of civilians?
Our enemy had started the war. They had killed millions of Chinese, and they had killed thousands of other Asiatics. In the month previous to the explosion of the atomic bomb, we had taken Okinawa, a Japanese island off the southern coast of Japan. In taking that island, we had to kill 110,000 Japanese, and we lost 12,000 of our own. Japanese officers, when they're defeated, usually commit suicide. They call it harakiri. And the men used hand grenades to kill themselves with, which is a horrible way to die, I'd think. I'd think a long time before I'd hold a grenade in my hand and let it blow me to pieces. Gave us some idea of what we had to do in order to defeat the Japanese in the war.
One philosopher has said that we are now living in an age in which goodness is regarded as naivete, integrity as stupidity, sympathy as weakness, and Christian charity as sheer foolishness. Was it not rationalized cynicism for Secretary of War Stimson to say, "Death is an inevitable part of every order that a wartime leader gives"?
Stimson was my Secretary of War. He was also Roosevelt's Secretary of War. He was one of the best informed men I ever had around me. He sternly questioned his Air Force leaders in 1945, particularly about the indiscriminate bombing of Tokyo. He was very anxious that I should not order the bombing of Kyoto, which is the religious center of the Shintoists in Japan. And I didn't.
Where is the thin line of ethics in defining long range against short range views? In the long run, the vastness of the atom bomb's monstrosity must surely be its own deterrent.
Firebombs reduced the frail Japanese cities to ashes. They were a horrible thing to do, and they destroyed more towns and more people than any other weapon of war that we used. Yet, they created no arguments after the fact. On March the 9th, 1945, one bombing of Tokyo using incendiaries killed an estimated 78,000 people and left 1.5 million homeless.
The ethics of war allowed for firebomb raids. Did this then sanction the use of the atom bomb's total destruction?
The next step already planned was to make the big invasion of Japan through Kyushu. The President of the United States is Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, and I had to help plan the normal invasion. They put that normal in quotation marks.
The chiefs of staff had to make the plan for the invasion of Japan without considering the atomic bomb. It was estimated that to land on Kyushu and conquer it would cost 700,000 men, 250,000 of our youngsters to be killed, and 500,000 of them to be maimed for life.
There is a perverse cleanliness in the planning of a normal war. The atom bomb is abnormal.
I don't mind telling you that you don't feel normal when you plan to have the Navy ready to evacuate 30,000 wounded in the first 30 days, or to get hospitals in the Philippines and other islands to prepare 54,000 beds. At each beachhead, you call for an LST boat loaded with whole blood. You plan that the 6 radar picket ships will have about 12 hours life expectancy due to kamikazes, and plan hundreds of thousands of complete final deaths for American boys who are alive and joking and having fun while you are doing your planning. I tell you, you break your heart and your head trying to figure out a way to save one life.
These are soldiers prepared and trained to die.
No American is ever trained to die. Japanese, because of their religion, are. Japanese are much more fanatical than the Germans. We should have to leave the Japanese islands much more thoroughly destroyed than was the case in Germany. For the Japanese last-ditch defense, the terrain was worse in the Kyushu than in Iwo Jima. It's unfavorable for our tanks. And we needed 5 million men to make that invasion. In Okinawa, 1 out of every 3 Americans ended up dead, wounded, or missing. Both Churchill and Stimson expected over 1 million Allied casualties, and enemy casualties would be far greater than our own. The name given to our invasion plan was Olympic, but I saw nothing godly about the killing of all the people that would be necessary to make that invasion.
There is a morality about army fighting army. There is a decadence in using an overwhelming force.
General Groves was the military man in charge of the whole bomb-building project. He wrote, and I quote, "Truman was like a little boy on a toboggan. He never had an opportunity to say, 'We will drop that bomb.' All he could say was, 'No.' Any political leader would have been crucified later if American lives were lost in the invading Japan. Well, I wasn't worried about being crucified."
In May of 1945, Secretary Stimson said, "To us now, the matter of first importance is how our use of this new weapon will appear in the long view of history."
It was a question of saving hundreds of thousands of American lives.
One scientist said, "We may have to bear the responsibility of opening the door to an era of devastation on an unimaginable scale."
I could not worry about history, what history would say about my personal morality.
The future will have a new measure, megadeath, 1 million deaths.
I made the only decision I ever knew how to make. I did what I thought was right.
A Screen Gems presentation.